Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Lemons Legacies Porch Talk. My name is Jody Allen, and I'm the director of the Lemon Project. And before we get started, I want to read a couple statements to you. The statement on our land acknowledgement statement and the statement on slavery and its legacies. So William and Mary acknowledges the indigenous peoples who are the original inhabitants of the lands our campus is on today. The Cherenhaka, Nottoway, Chickahominy, Eastern Chickahominy, Mattaponi, Monacan, Nansemond, Nottoway, Pamunkey, Potomac, Upper Mattaponi, and the Rappahannock tribes, and pay our respect to their tribal members past and present. The Board of Visitors acknowledges that William and Mary enslaved people, exploited them and their labor, and perpetuated the legacies of racial discrimination. The board profoundly regrets these activities, apologizes for them, expresses its deep appreciation for the contributions made by the African and African American members of its community to the vitality of William and Mary, then, now, and for all time coming, and commits to continue our efforts to remedy the lingering effects of past injustices. Okay. So tonight we're in for a real treat. We have we're presenting, well, our guests are presenting The Search for Founding Black Mothers, Digital Storytelling as Reclamation, as digital storytelling as reclamation, sorry. Our panelists are project co-directors, Dr. Gretchen Rudham and Dr. Candace Logan Washington from Morgan State University. Kendrick Kinney II, Assistant Dean of the School of Arts, Sciences and Business at Notre Dame of Maryland. Courtney Belzer, middle school English teacher and native of Baltimore, Maryland. Jared Anderson, middle school humanities teacher in Baltimore, Maryland. Nick Kennedy, English teacher at Arroyo Grande High School in California, and Victoria Moten. Okay, I'm gonna turn the floor over to our guest. And you will be able to, and you'll be asked to, if you have, as you have questions, you will be able to submit them, and they will be asked once the panel is finished. So, Gretchen, I think I turn it over to you. So, okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jody. Thanks to Sarah. Thanks to the whole team, to students, faculty, community members. Thanks for hosting our fabulous panel. And so I'm going to be kind of the awkward moderator and really leaning on our fabulous team, our search team, I guess, as we call it. Also, sorry, Victoria, do you want to also introduce yourself, where you're at? And
Hi, I am also a middle school teacher in Maryland.
Thank you. So we have Dr. Logan Washington and I are the kind of colleagues and friends and kind of project kind of team in the work. And I really want to just start off with really how the project began. And we're kind of running tonight like a conversation. And so other panelists, you know how it works with our team. Just jump in if you have a thought or if that kind of takes you somewhere else. So we have some guiding questions we're going to run through, but also please feel free to jump in. Yeah, I'm just grateful to have the opportunity to be kind of invited on the search by Dr. Logan Washington, really. And that's kind of how the project began. So do you want to go ahead and kick it off? Like kind of how the search began and what is the importance of reclaiming stories of founding Black mothers?
So I think it's really poignant to kind of mark time around the hour that we're in. We have survived probably about 2.5, almost 3 years of a global health crisis, as well as a racial pandemic and other pandemics that have creeped their way into society. And Dr. Rudham and I were just talking about our daughters, who are both African-American girls. And, you know, we were just having just like a kicking it friends conversation about what is the story we're going to tell our daughters about the moment that we're in. And it really led to this idea of citizenship as a construct and being able to help articulate to our daughters and as practitioners and teachers, the other daughters that we encounter in our praxis every day as professors, as public school teachers, and just citizens of the world. What would be the legacy that we would want to be left for this moment in terms of the positionality we are in as two human beings growing and changing in this climate? So citizenship became a big piece. And maybe it was really ironic, a week later is when we began to see national monuments that were erected for Confederate soldiers be dismantled by the body politic that actually allowed them to be there in the first place. So we saw the nation really try to reclaim itself and restore their proclamation of this is our country, this is our land. So it really got us thinking about our daughters, but also this idea of the search for founding Black mothers. We had a conversation after that, like, whoa, like, we know a ton about the founding fathers. And I was brought up in a family that I would be remiss to really mark time on the founding Black mothers of my own family. And I'm like, Black women really have served as a catalyst for the preservation of history and really the purveyors of the truth in communities since the beginning of time. And what does it look like to think about the founding of our nation in a very different way through the lens of a Black woman's experience and the contributions of Black women throughout history? What does it mean? Like, do we even have a narrative? So we began to just like ask questions. Like, my daughter was starting middle school at that time. Gretchen's daughter was in the early grades of elementary school. And we asked those questions and the answer came up kind of like, well, this is what y'all taught us, or this is kind of the thing. So we went on the search. It started out as an academic praxis. We saw a call for proposals for a chapter in the book, and we said, let's just go for it. And we were able to actually have 8 impactful Black women in this first iteration of the search come to us. So we kind of just sat like, okay, so, actually you all lead us. Tell us what you want us to know about you. So it ended up 8 Black women and really looking at the founding of the nation and the stories that were told about them and the different ways and the complexities of who they are and the reverberations of what we see in society today based on the work of their hands. So I can't say like, oh, we've researched. They actually researched us and found us. It was a very interesting process about how we selected the first 8 women in this particular publication, and then ultimately writing a grant and really thinking deeply about what does curriculum say about Black women? Where are the spots in public education, but just education in general that centers the story, the narrative, the contribution, and really the badassery of Black women in the founding of our nation. So that's kind of the background. And I guess as we move through the conversation, we'll talk about the idea of citizenship, talk about the idea of erasure, because as we began to dig deeply into the archives, we found out really quickly that we had to piece the story together in a lot of different ways. So I guess I'll throw it back to you, Dr. R, to kind of introduce our panelists and their genius and brilliance in the project.
Awesome, thank you. And just that idea of being able to be on a search with someone else, it's kind of a difficult search. It's really full of a lot of kind of like hauntings, as Toni Morrison will call it. And so I'm really grateful to Candace that we were able to do that together. She invited me on that. And then it really became such a larger part of how I even view research, how I view storytelling, how I start to look for gaps and omissions. And, and even my daughter, as she's now moving into upper elementary, has this idea of founding Black mothers is just a natural part of her vocabulary. Oh, is that another founding Black mother? Oh, and so that just in and of itself, just to watch that over, Mom, what's that new book? Or is she a founding Black mother? And so that just becomes this place where she can then keep looking for more stories and keep telling her own story. So I know tonight we really want to focus on storytelling, and the educators really were the center of how we designed the project. The NEH seminar was just a 4-week process, but since then we've really built a community and continue to stay in touch with all the wonderful ideas and continuing learning that educators are doing. So for us, both Candace and I as educators ourselves, that really became how we designed the project. So it was a 4-week institute. We did it virtually, and that was one of the first NEH planned as virtual. We didn't kind of pivot to virtual for the pandemic. We really designed it as virtual. So this idea of what digital storytelling can bring founding Black mothers and stories to people. You don't have to always go to the place, although we wish we could have gone to all the places. But we went from California to Ontario, down to Harper's Ferry, down to New Orleans and North Carolina, Virginia. So we were able to virtually travel with folks without having to kind of incur that kind of travel, but also expense. And folks were able to join in the different modalities that were great for them. So we had a virtual experience, and it really, we had a lot of visiting scholars that we were honored to have, but the biggest honor was working with educators. So I'm going to throw this question out in no particular order. What did you really learn about founding Black mothers, or about reclaiming the stories of founding Black mothers? This is for all our esteemed educators.
I can start. Earlier today, I was watching Samar's The Queen of Comedies special, and she has this bit about knowledge versus wisdom, and it made me reflect a little bit on the process of the search, and that we come in it seeking all the knowledge. We know that there are unknown knowns. We know that there are unknown unknowns. We come already very humble into it, and then you leave with a certain praxis of wisdom of how you can kind of curate that experience. And so I think for me, that process was really becoming very wise through experience, through this first experience of how I might go about this kind of search. And so when there's just knowledge, we can take it for granted. It can be erased. It can be uncurated without care. Or I think about the custodial role that we have just over the production of knowledge, and that wisdom is, a lot of that wisdom is how I think Morrison also says, just maps and questions and awareness of the journey and the loss. And so that loss and that haunting, that journey, that's the wisdom. And then when we have that, I think that begin to unlock a different understanding of how I would go about the search.
I would have to agree. I think there are lots of feelings on engaging in the search. I mean, grief being one of them, frustration, anger. I mean, I learned about some of these women in grade school, and I clearly did not learn all that there was to learn about them. And so I was both angry, right? Why don't I know this? I'm grown. But also proud. To just know things like Harriet Tubman was a general in the war, it elevates what I have to offer to my students. Like Dr. R mentioned, now it goes without question that I introduce the voices of women in our literature discussions. And it's just not it's not even a thing. Or like I teach English and I've had my students ask me, do you also teach history? And I'm like, they go hand in hand. There's no way that I could teach you the story without the context. And the search really forced me to do more research, even when teaching, because it's vital, because there is a voice that's missing. And I had to make sure that that voice is heard, especially when we're talking about literature. So, yeah.
And I guess it might be helpful for us to kind of define the search as Dr. R and I saw it at the time of our research. So we definitively define the search as an exhumation and excavation of symbolic annihilation of people in knowledge. It's an ongoing haunting with immense responsibilities, reclamations, and redressing of stories, knowledge, genius, and truth. So the search is more, and I know at the end of us really conceptually putting the search together, like we were physically tired based on just the amount of exhuming we had to do in terms of the archives and what we knew the responsibility was as practitioners in both the higher education space that really is impacting public education, P to 21. We had to really be able to bring those truths to light in a way that it created like an immense responsibility for us. And it was a great experience, but it really, it's a journey we all probably should go on in one, particular facet of our lives. I learned so much about me as a person, practitioner, teacher, scholar, friend, storyteller, that could last me the rest of my life.
Building on that definition of the search, I'm reminded of a quote from one of our visiting scholars, Dr. Shirley Moody Turner. She's also an expert on Anna Julia Cooper. And in her introduction to the portable Anna Julia Cooper, published by Penguin Press this last year, she talks about asking readers to be attentive to the, quote, gaps, silences, and fissures that often haunt the archives of Black women writers in particular, kind of building on the Toni Morrison quote. But thinking that underneath these gaps, silences, and fissures, there's a wealth of information about the ways in which Black women have contributed to the framework of society and culture in the United States. One thing that stands out to me is that the search requires participants to read against the grain. For example, from Dr. Shirley Moody Turner, I learned that Black women's papers are often found in the collections of their male contemporaries. From Dr. Cheryl LaRoche, a foremost scholar on the Underground Railroad, another one of our visiting scholars, I learned that there's an uneven distribution of recognition, resulting in many white pillars of the Underground Railroad receiving recognition, as opposed to the vast number of Black abolitionists and Black women who led the charge as well. Dr. LaRoche also spoke of the challenges of triangulating sources when academia has a bias toward the written word. For example, what happens when you want to incorporate the spoken testimony of persons for whom learning to read was illegal? When I think of reclamation, I think of giving honor and credit to those who are so worthy of recognition, as their contributions have been harbingers of societal change. And I've learned that the search is both a generative process and a recursive process. Generative in the sense that inquiry begets inquiry. Looking for a specific piece of information about a particular founding Black mother leads a partaker in the search for another breadcrumb, therefore adding nuance and depth and providing other pathways for inquiry. And it's recursive in that some searches provide you with answers to questions that you haven't yet posed. For example, while creating a resource for the Institute's repository, I learned about Nannie Helen Burroughs, an educator, activist, feminist, who, among other accomplishments, opened a school for women, helped lead the Women's Convention, served on a committee at the White House pertaining to housing, and so forth. And in my search, I came across a photo of Nannie Helen Burroughs that had been attributed to Sarah Mapps Douglas, a founding Black mother in her own right. So that's just a small example of the extant misrecognition of our founding Black mothers.
Thanks, Nick. Jared, do you want to hop in?
Yeah, so for me, the search was a deeply transformative process. For me, something that I had to check is that you're not always going to find the answers to the questions, right? Like sometimes it's going to be a continuous process where you're going to meet dead ends. Like as somebody who I learned through this process is Mary Bowser, who was one of the Civil War spies who worked in the Confederate White House, and I was very interested about her. And it was some questions that I could not find about just like her upbringing and what inspired her to be a spy and things of that nature. So I had to go through the archives and try my best to find the answers to questions that weren't always there to begin with. So it was deeply transformative, and it just made me want to continue to uplift Black women's stories in my classroom and just through storytelling when I'm talking to my friends or my family, because these stories deserve to be heard.
Thank you. So I'm going to I was thinking about playing a few small clips from some of the visiting scholars and then speaking. I know Professor Kenny, are you in the house? I think I saw you come in.
Yep, I just saw him.
Okay, I can't see you on my squares, but I know you. So he is our resident digital media expert, producer extraordinaire. And so really helping Candace and I on the kind of tech end of how to bring these stories to life. And so that was another aspect, is that idea of digital storytelling at itself as a tool to be a natural kind of partner for the search. So I was going to show a couple of clips, or Professor Kenny, do you want to also just talk a little bit about digital storytelling first, or should we hear from the videos first? What do you think?
I can kind of speak to it a little bit.
Okay.
So digital storytelling essentially is nuanced in a couple different ways. So one of the different ways that we thought about looking at digital storytelling was a new way to assess. So essentially, it's a way that obviously we want to meet people where they are. And we know that in this new digital world and digital spaces, we're on a Zoom conference, right? So everybody's living in these spaces. So what does that look like in terms of how we assess our students and how do we give them voices? So that's really one way that we thought about looking at it, is to be able to create change agents in academia by providing students voices. And the other way we thought about it was a way to archive, right? So not only is it a great way to change the way we think about assessment and education, but it's a way that we can use it from an archival standpoint, and have students think about creating visual ethnographies in a way. So being academics in the research space, but something that can touch people and something that can live digitally. Those are just some of the ways that we thought about digital storytelling, and especially when it comes to this project, because these are stories, obviously they're not new stories, but they're stories that need to be told, and they need to reach people, and they need to reach people where they are. So these are ways that we can connect in that way.
And so do you want to speak a little bit about kind of our journeys of, going on site and producing? And so, we were really this summer bringing a lot of these places and spaces. Candace and Kendra can really talk about what was that like to, the real behind the curtain of bringing, StreamYard and a lot of different on-site filming of these locations. What was that like?
I'm gonna let Candace speak to that, and then I can jump in.
We're a team. I think a couple places that we had the opportunity to rest our feet on. I think when we got to Mount Vernon, I felt an immense sense of like panic. I don't know what it was about the time, space, and place, but it really was the ability to bring an experience to my face, an experience that I read about, researched about, to really give it the physical placement of pathways in spaces that the women that we studied, and particularly Ona Judge, places that she walked. Her feet walked on the same cobblestone. Some of the dirt that was there when my feet walked on those grounds, her feet walked on those grounds, and really to be able to look at the African burial grounds in just place as story actually really came to life for us in ways that were both personal, but really that evoked the continuance and really opened a door for people to continue to use place as a variable and a large variable in storytelling. Like, what does it feel like, smell like, and even look like when you actually share time and space with a founding Black mother?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that our journeys definitely were impactful in that way. And again, the good thing was, our scholars was from all over. They were from, different coasts, different countries, and being able to bring them into that experience from a digital standpoint, so they still got to feel those feelings, I think was extremely impactful.
And really, it kind of underscored what as a practitioner I used to tell my students about reading. You can go anywhere through story. You literally can go anywhere. And that was just another kind of reinforcement that, guess what? We can take our students and young people anywhere through story.
Definitely.
And so we also did a lot with speaking to the educators about what that looks like to do kind of video logs, to kind of use reflective tools. And so it's equally part of how we structured the story, but also how we want them to be able to bring it back to their classrooms. And so finding new tools, I know I'm still in my novice phase around it, but just how do I use these new kind of programs, and just thinking about bringing as Dr. Logan Washington said, bringing folks to places that everyone can travel to. I know, Jared, we went on our own adventure as well. And so this idea of being able to be in a place and trying to convey that. Do any of the educators want to jump in as well, talking about kind of digital storytelling? Were there any takeaways for you or thoughts around that?
Well, the project that I took away, so in working through my digital faux pas, if you will, like trying to put things together, it helped me understand just how digitizing things makes these stories accessible. So unlike documents sitting in boxes in somebody's basement, now my students are able to just go on YouTube or wherever and find the information. And so I found that really critical. So the project that I decided to work on thereafter was a neighborhood documentary, because I learned through the search that, these are unsung heroes. These are folks that we don't know about, but they had a tremendous impact on the world around them. And so having my students engage in a very similar activity where they're having to interview people in person and record that, and then we're going to share it with our local community, because as Professor Kenny mentioned, it's preservation, right? Like it's holding on to just the vitality of these folks' stories. And I mean, I'm a literature teacher, so I love books, but books can be damaged. And we're in the 21st century. And so if I'm talking to Gen Z, it really matters that they have this digital platform to engage with history.
Before this Summers Institute, I hadn't really considered bringing vlogging into the classroom. And so to have the opportunity throughout the summer to create different vlogs and to share them with our team, and then to move from trying out the platforms on my own to then thinking of how this could be useful in the classroom, and recognizing that we can have students filming vlogs as curation, and curation as care. And what does that look like to have our students film in their own spaces, and recognizing that their narratives have weight as well, and that they can contribute something based on their interactions with their community. And that becomes almost like an artifact. And so just super exciting to see how blogs can be used, and a new opportunity that I'm looking forward to bringing into the classroom this semester.
And so I think I want to actually show kind of an example, show a video. It was a video kind of a ways that we kind of brought one of the scholars to the Institute. And it also really frames the search. I'm going to try, hopefully not awkwardly, to share my screen and the sound and show you a clip from the Vashti Du Bois. She's actually the founder and curator of the Color Girls Museum in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, if anyone's been there. And if you haven't been there, I highly recommend booking a tour for students or just for yourself or family. It's a tremendously transformative space. So I want to just show a quick clip that the extraordinary Professor Kenny put together for us and we shared with the scholars, but it gives you a sense of how you can still feel like you're sitting in the Color Girls Museum, even though you might be in a different country or place. So I'm just going to share about her thoughts around the search and how she defines it for herself. And actually, Dr. Logan Washington was the amazing interviewer in this scene. So, all right, bear with me, hold please. Okay, so that was a tech fail, but I'm going to reload it up. But in the meantime, while I'm fixing my tech on this end, I would like to actually have the scholars talk about this idea of what you learned personally through the search. We kind of spoke a little bit more about what you learned professionally, but what did you personally take away from this search? So while I'm digging and fixing my YouTube issue, do you all want to jump in and talk a little bit about that?
Okay, I was trying to see if Courtney was going to jump in. Did you want to jump in?
Yeah, that's right. I can go. Life affirming. I literally, this work on the search, I was also doing parallel to a personal case study in my own family. And so leaning more and more into the search, I found literally my purpose in the ways in which I quite literally may serve as an embodiment of a way to address the erasure of some descendants in my own family's history. And so one thing for me is really marking this search as since inception as one of the themes. And so in a lot of ways it is, I think there's one point where there's a lesson that we say the search as exhumation, to dig something buried, especially a dead body, out of the earth and to revive it, restore it after there's been a period of neglect and a period of forgetting. And so personally, leaning into that family archive, I have been learning as a scholar, as a researcher, as an educator, how to incorporate the search as a part of my pedagogical praxis. So how does it operate alongside the teaching framework that already existed? So in a way that it feels very infused, I think, into my everyday framework of how I do something like universal design for learning. I cannot think of this concept of inclusivity in my classroom anymore without there being a part on my lesson plan that acknowledges a moment to search. And that I found 9 times out of 10, it quite literally falls back on a erasure of a Black woman's story. And so I continuously kind of incorporate those practices into my classroom, but also figuring out how does this operate personally as political and professional.
Victoria?
For me, that idea of curation as self-care really resonated with me. I have been in the process of preserving, I'm my family's historian. So I'm the pack rat, I'm the one that has everybody's stuff. And for a while, it just sat there, like the things in the boxes in someone's basement. And I think some part of me wasn't ready to sift through to it because it can be heavy. It's a lot. But this, the search really taught me that it's necessary. Preservation is vital. Like it is what keeps us alive. It's what gives us voice. And I think I mentioned earlier that I felt immense pride after learning about these women and almost forgetting that there are women in my own family that I can be proud of, that I can share the things that they have contributed, not just to my world, but to other people. And so that curation itself, it is self-care. I mean, it's hard at first, but it's the kind of thing that's like, why is this just been sitting in a box? You know, how can I share this with other people? Because it's the sharing part that it's like a release. You know, I just hid it away. It was in the box somewhere, but let me share this with other people. And you don't know how that can just change someone. So yeah, that curation and self-care is personally just been transformative to me.
And I think when we see the Colored Girls Museum, you'll see that this is Vashti's home, you know, and so I have thought during the pandemic of how much of my house and my apartment began to archive my students and myself in that moment, but how she did not let the absence of a space keep her from doing the work. And so I found that also being very implicated in my vlogs of how do I show for my students as a storyteller, like my home and my process in that way. So yeah, that was a good.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to try to show Vashti since you led me so beautifully into that, Courtney. And now I guess you can't show whole screens on Zoom. So I'm just going to awkwardly share this and hopefully it works this time.
You know, the Colored Girls Museum was founded in 2015, and typically when I'm telling, you know, the story, when people ask me the question about, oh, so like, when did you get started? I give that date because that's when the Colored Girls Museum debuted as the Colored Girls Museum opened for business. But the reality is that I, like every other every other Black woman I know, every woman of the African diaspora that I know, you know, whether we're conscious or disconscious, we have been on the search for generations, and we pass that intention to search on to the next generation. We pass it on in utero because there's an intuitive understanding that if, you know, there's a reclamation project afoot. And I think that we've been in this process of recovering ourselves and our stories, finding and founding certainly since we came to this country. But I also want to be clear that our erasure is not just in this country, and it's not just about the erasure as a result of being folks who are colored, but rather the ways in which erasure occurs because we're femme. Erasure occurs because of class. It's such a much broader category. And as somebody who is leading an institution that really prioritizes the search in multiple ways, I feel like I've been sort of handed an assignment. And then this is an assignment that I've made a public event. And it's an assignment that's a collective assignment. I feel like I got the assignment in a really clear way. And part of the work is now to share that assignment with all of the other ordinary women and girls of the African diaspora that I meet. And how we come into this assignment is, sometimes it's an artifact. I was thinking about this today. I was thinking about all of the, all of the folks whose paths cross mine, and how part of what we have to understand about the search is that we're not trying to keep anything or keep anybody. We're really, I think about it as just like we're opening things up, such that these things are being surfaced. And we're providing an apparatus for you to be able to see, because some of it is apparent, but you need a different set of eyes in order to notice what is sitting right there. Our education system, our political system has really functioned in a way that keeps us limited, I'll say, in what we're able to understand about what our complex stories are, because we're all founders of something.
Yeah, that's an awesome kind of segue into really just the vocal introduction of the first 8 women that we studied. Definitely want to introduce you to founding Black mother, Mary Ann Shadd Cary. And, a big piece of who she was and really still is an intercontinental freedom fighter who really coined the term "stay out of my sunlight" to really provide America with some thoughts around the ways in which other groups of people shadow and actually cover the story of Black women throughout history. Our next founding Black mother is the We Out OG, actually known as Ona Marie Judge Staines. And her story has gotten, recent popularity within literature circles with Dunbar's book, but she really was one of the first founding Black mothers to really infiltrate the system. She escaped from George and Martha Washington's house, and one that she's quoted to say, "I'm free and I have been, I trust I have been. They were packing, so I was leaving." So they were packing to take her back to Virginia, so she left. So she really is the OG in the group. And then we have the Eatington Pen, which is Harriet Jacobs. And she definitely is the author of The Narrative of the Life of a Slave Girl. Our next, we talk about her being the discredited, disfigured, and decoyed Isabella Humphrey, Americanized, known as Sojourner Truth. Really, Ain't I a Woman was originally Aren't I a Woman? And Sojourner Truth's life and her impact reverberates from the grave. On her selected grave site, there is a quote that asks America, really, is God dead? So she left us with a thought, even in her transition to a different state. So we also studied the legacy of literary disruption of Louisa Lulu Matilda Jacobs, which is Harriet Jacobs' daughter, and her ability to take her mother's legacy and spread that message around the world, and to be able to support the idea of Black children's genius at a time where the nation was placing itself back together after the Civil War. And then we absolutely have the distortion of Arminta Ross, Harriet Moses Tubman. And, being from Maryland, I really took the search for Harriet Tubman very serious, but really being able to, as one of our scholars says, see Harriet Tubman in a light that actually has not been shined on her. The way that literature and descriptions have distorted her image, her seniority as a general in literature, how we kind of covered that up too. And I think that was all of ours. She's definitely last, but definitely not least, because her founding Black motherness actually is in conversations today in the government. We are still in the middle of the conversation about placing her on the $20 bill. So she is still reverberating her message of freedom and equality from the grave.
So I want to also open it up for questions from the audience for any of our panelists. And because I know we're winding down, we could talk about the search forever and definitely talk about different kind of aspects, but I want to make sure we're addressing folks' concerns and questions. Are there questions for panelists? It looks like in the chat, there's one. What are some helpful tools or platforms for digital storytelling that you found easy to use? Professor Kenny or any scholars? Any digital platforms you found easy for digital storytelling?
Yeah, so I can jump in. So essentially, what I like to bring and what I share with the scholars is a lot of times you'll have people who kind of shy away just because of the resources, or I may not have the equipment to do this. But what I shared coming in was pretty much everyone walks around with these. Everything can be done with this. So I essentially taught my my blogging workshop around mobile journalism. And mobile journalism pretty much shapes the media industry right now. And being a communications-based professor, we talk about this in a lot of my courses, but I think it's helpful when it comes to digital storytelling. So we pretty much see, if you turn on nightly news, I know most of us try to not overwhelm ourselves with it, but when we tune into media, most of the stories and things that we're watching is based on individuals now having a voice due to mobile journalism. So what I did was I shared with the scholars how to essentially be able to shoot content with your phone, whether you're using voice memos to do voiceovers, shooting video footage on your phone. And then there are several editing platforms that are pretty easy to navigate as far as mobilely. So the students were able to use a couple, and one of them is called Splice. And Splice is a mobile digital video editing platform, and it allows you to you can create a voiceover, you can put your clips, and you can basically put together a story using that. Another one is called Quick. So there are a bunch on the market, and then Adobe Premiere has a mobile device as well. So Adobe Premiere. So those are some of the ones that I think the students or scholars rather were able to use, and my students use in the classroom as well.
Thanks, Professor Kinney. We have another great question. With politicians such as Governor DeSantis attacking school curriculums that foreground African-American history, do you worry about how some of the public or school administrators view your organization's important work? So educators, how are we doing this work in this climate?
I happen to be in a very open space. We are actually reading Frederick Douglass's narrative, and I was like, okay, how can we get some women's voices in here? And then the history teachers are reading Ona Judge. So I'm like, yes, okay. So I don't have to fight as hard. However, I make it a point to have my students' voice how important this is. So instead of me fighting against administrators, parents, other people who aren't even in the school building, instead of doing that, having students write down or document, like vlogging, for example, why this is important work and why the books that they're reading are important and the history that they're engaged in is important, because they are the folks that we bring this to. So many other people are dictating what they see and censoring what they see. And if you have the students say it themselves, it makes all the difference in the world. They're not going to listen to me, but they will listen to the students. And it is delightful to see students protesting out, you know, making their voices heard, because that's part of the work, right? Like at some point I should be able to step aside and that they should be empowered enough to be able to say themselves, this is important. And so that's one way that I think would be helpful. I mean, and eventually they're future voters, you know, like their voices matter and they need to let politicians especially know they are a force to be reckoned with.
Thank you, Victoria. Any other thoughts on that, or do we want to jump to a new question? I feel like you covered it, Victoria. Any other educators want to jump in though? I don't want to move if you wanted to chat. Courtney?
I'll just say sometimes you are positioned in that decoy role that now you get to operate so overtly. So I am the only Black female lead teacher in my K-8 school, and we have equity and culturally responsive pedagogy goals that do not exist without my instruction right now. That will reach those goals. And so there's a way in which my instruction can be what it needs to be, because there's a little bit of absent-mindedness of this instruction. And when we put it back on the students as well, even existing first week of school, I introduced Fannie Lou Hamer. And yet when I do still a form to open my new unit up and I ask them, give me just one historical fact, you know, not a single student, 8th grade, gives a fact about a Black woman. And so this data piece that students provide me still then allows me to validate, number one, why Black History Month, and going into Women's History Month, we're about to have an entire book group or differentiated book groups that all center from Claudette Colvin to Ona Judge. And so that's one of the ways too that I think we are in complicated positions right now, where it feels like we are working for the system, but or that we are making progress, but what is the actual full picture that's going on?
I teach on California's Central Coast in a town that I recently learned was a former sundown town. And I know that there's a big focus locally here on the curriculum, specifically in terms of literature. And as an English teacher, I really try my best when I have the opportunity to supplement. I'm trying to bring in those voices that aren't often recognized as being instrumental to the canon. So bringing in Black women's voices and experiences. I have a quote on my wall that learning should be in part uncomfortable, because if it's not, are we really learning? And so I try to give my students the tools to conduct inquiry and to ask those questions, and hopefully leading them in those directions and giving them the tools. The hope is that in facilitating, they will uncover the truths that they need to learn in order to see a broader picture of America and society.
Thank you. I'm going to actually move to another question, but again, Jared, if you want to jump in, don't be shy too. Someone asked, you mentioned this work can be physically and emotionally exhausting. How have you overcome these aspects? Can you talk a little bit more about this idea of self-care?
I think our panelists really brought home, go concepts, y'all got it. Curation is care. In terms of the legacy that I leave, both my intellectual legacy as well as my physical legacy within my family space, it would be to the detriment of society, the world, and even the human race if I didn't just move on and go on with the work. This is the work. Racial battle fatigue, gender battle fatigue, all of those things are clear and present, but really being able to situate the work that you do in the reclamation process as healing also. So it is exhausting, physically exhausting, but it's also equally in part healing, not just for me, but for as a practitioner, which again, you have an intellectual legacy to leave when you are graced with the presence of children. It is a responsibility for us to be able to provide them, to Nick's point, with a multifaceted perspective of America. And I take care of myself knowing like the awesome things that Black women have contributed, both in invention. I mean, literally, it's so funny, like in our family, we are related to the inventor of the GPS, family member, founding Black mother. So every time I get in my car and I'm lost, I'm like, see how she's taking care of me? In just even those small things are healing for me as a Black woman that Dr. Gladys West offered to the world. And I know and can take comfort that Gladys got my back. I know I'm not going to drive my car into a river.
Yeah. And thinking about it as like a curation, I found myself praying. I found myself planning outings very intentionally as I have to do this part of this reclamation process. I now know I need to be in community with people immediately after that. Being outside in nature would often restore me. And then finding my own journaling. For me, I like to write poems over beats. So that was a way to really find something that whatever those feelings of haunting or healing, I could put it into an outlet, but really having a cycle of curation in that toolkit, no matter where you're at, because there will be reverberations where you are so excited to finally see it. My grandmother was a cosmetologist. And so while I'm trying to go and retrace people through the archive, I'm having this moment of like, they're all other women. This is about to be impossible. And so I'm on FaceTime with a friend doing it. And so that process is really recursive. And something that you are your own self-custodian at.
And like Vashti was saying, this idea of it being a collective calling. And I think that this team, we really leaned into that, and it just feels like it's ongoing. And so we're always sharing resources, and can we plan trips, can we get together, can we connect? And just in the downtimes when you can't find, like Jared was saying, that frustration point, there's a network to reach out to, but it feels like it's a more connective and collective reclamation project, and that has been really, I think, special as why this particular project has been so important for me personally, but also I can see it for the educators in the program and for, again, the children that are getting all of this new information, and not only my daughter, but all the other fourth graders out there, and all the other K through, college. So I hate to wrap up because I know there are a few more questions, but I want to honor everyone's time, and just a special thank you to the panel and the panelists and the search team, and again, for the invitation for us to be able to share our journey with you. Thanks again, everyone, for having us. Thanks, Jody. Thanks, Sarah.
And just make sure you check us out on the web at www.foundingblackmothers.com. We are there.
Thank you all very much for being here. This was an amazing opportunity to share not only with our community, but everybody. We're reaching many more people now with Zoom. And so we're very happy to have been able to share this with our community. Thank you all, and keep up the good work. And I want to say, Mary Bowser, one of my favorite people, okay?
She is the epitome of the search.
Yes.
She is.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you know what, Nick, thank you for reminding me, there's also a huge repository on our website. I'm so remiss. Thank you, Nick, for getting me together there and sharing all the resources that educators put together. So really kind of built out whole units and whole modules, just even whole semesters and years, look at how to incorporate Founding Black Mothers. And there's so much richness and great ideas there. Thanks, Nick. And Jared, it looks like, Jody, you have another Mary Bowser fan, so you all can connect. Well, thanks again, everybody. We'll stay after if folks have questions, but thanks again to the esteemed panelists. Thanks for coming, and thanks for the audience.